The next derivative we want to talk about, and actually we're going to talk about two simultaneously. Futures and forwards. Now, these two contracts behave almost identically. In fact, they do behave identically. Not almost, they do behave identically. So the question is, what's the difference between a future and a forward? Well, what they both do is we enter into a contract, or we enter into a contract with a counterparty where we agree to buy or sell something of value for a price X days, years in the future. Okay? That's all this does, right? We agree to buy steel a year from now at a particular price, right? At that particular price, whatever that price is, sometime in the future. We agree to sell wheat sometime in the future. We agree to buy a currency someday in the future, whatever it is, right? So we agree to buy or sell something of value for a price X number of days in the future. Okay, that's all a futures or a forward contract essentially is. So what's the difference between a future versus a forward? The future is an exchange traded contract. The forward is an over-the-counter or private transaction. Over-the-counter OTC or private transaction. So that's the big difference. So why is this important to understand? Well, with the future, with it being an exchange traded contract, these are traded, say, on the CFTC, the Central Future. I can't remember even what CFTC stands for right off the top of my head, but they're traded on the CFTC, right? The Futures Trade whatever corporation. So what happens is with the futures contract, if there is a gain or a loss on either party, whoever is holding the futures contract, there have to be margin calls, which basically says that if you have a loss in your contract, you have to deposit a percentage of that loss into a margin account. Okay? You have to deposit some percent. So there is cash in this marketplace. So that if anyone in the futures market fails or goes bankrupt, there's at least some liquidity in the market to protect people on the other side of the transaction. With the forward contract, there is no such thing. Unless the contract calls for margin deposits. Into some kind of a trust account or some kind of a restricted account. So those are the two big, I mean, this is the big difference between a futures and a forward contract. Futures are exchange traded. There's liquidity in the market. A forward is a private transaction, an over-the-counter transaction where there is no market maker in between. There's no organization that is making sure that the the contracts are clearing appropriately. And because there's liquidity in the futures contract, there's less volatility with respect to fair value. In the forward market, you have to consider, unless you have the contract calling for margin deposits, you have to consider when you determine the fair value, whether or not one of the counterparties may actually default. And now you have to factor in default risk. So that's the big difference between futures and forwards.